I just feel like I've been around the block, ripping up fantasy stock, working around the clock. Look at the view from the top. Researching rookies a lot? No, I just be listening to pods. Yeah, one in particular, I'm just a messenger. Let me just pass on the rock. Browning, brunning, pruning, pronouncing ain't what he's doing. What he's doing is not losing, but infusing you with new things. And there's Dennis the Bennett, yeah. The man is a menace, yeah. Building a dynasty, some of the finest things. Promise you, you won't regret it. Sly as a fox, culture than pop. Give him his props. Here is a thought, here is a box, and you cannot compare them at all. So don't even try. Careful with the news, but when you use a take, I take up Tony Fire. I mean Dyer, because anyone else is a huge mistake. Whoa, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Hey, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Go.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Football Roundtable podcast. It's Monday. We hope you missed us. We were not able to get together on Friday, but we have good news for you. We're going to do twice as many teams today. So we will do the second half of the AFC North that we started last week, and we will also do the first half of the NFC North. So a lot of North going on today. It is also Scott Fishbowl Day. My draft barely kicked off. I've gotten 2 picks in. I got Christian McCaffrey and Dak Prescott at 110 and 203. But Matt and Dennis, I believe you guys are a little further in your drafts. Dennis, you want to tell us about your draft was it Cincinnati?
It was. Actually, I got my live Scott Fishbowl 13 Cincinnati shirt, courtesy of John Bosch. John set up a fantastic thing at Streetside Brewery. There's probably there was 36 drafters, probably a total of 50 of us there. Just people coming in, hanging out, people helping John. And it was great. I'm picking out of the 7th spot. Only got sniped, I think, 3 times. So overall, I was pretty happy with my team. I figured I was going to get a quarterback in the first, unless Kelsey fell to me, but I knew he wasn't going to. I wasn't really ready to go running back or wide receiver there. I mean, this scoring, great wide receivers are great wide receivers, but the scoring really favors running backs. Actually, I started out with Justin Herbert, and I went Herbert over Justin Fields at 7, and I was good with that. It was a challenge because I love Ohio State, and Justin Fields is an Ohio State quarterback. Followed that up with Jonathan Taylor and Josh Jacobs, again, leaning into the running backs. 4th round, Kyle Pitts was there. I'd gotten sniped on Mark Andrews, so I went Kyle Pitts in the 4th, Aaron Rodgers in the 5th. Finally, in the 6th, I went with my first wide receiver, which was Amari Cooper. And I went wide receiver for 5 straight rounds. Cooper, Terry McLaurin, or no, I take that back. I did take a David Njoku in the middle of that. But my receivers, Amari Cooper, Terry McLaurin, Deontay Johnson, Mike Williams. 3 of the 4 are the number 1 receivers on their team. So I felt really good about that. Stacked up a couple backup RBs and A.J. Dillon and Tank Bigsby. Hopefully Bigsby comes through. And in the 12th round, added Desmond Ridder as my QB3. So I feel real good about my team right now.
The nice thing, too, is you grabbed a couple of players that we're going to talk about today. So it's like you were show prepping while you were drafting.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I'm only through 3 rounds. I don't get to do the live draft in Dallas due to some family stuff. So Scott was very gracious enough to put me into a slow draft. I'm in the Tootsie Roll division. We're in the 4th round right now. Yeah, they're very good. I like them as well. It might make it back to me, so maybe I'll make a pick on air. But I'm picking out of the 10th spot. I started Justin Jefferson, Kirk Cousins, and I took Daniel Jones as well with the high-end quarterback scoring. I was actually surprised that Daniel Jones finished as I believe it was a top 7 quarterback last year. Yeah, right behind one Geno Smith, who was phenomenal. So I agree with Dennis. It definitely favors running backs. Quarterbacks also, because he took all that negative scoring out of there, are also very good at anyone that you can get rushing upside for. So I like my 2 to start my two quarterbacks. They've gone very heavy running backs. So I'm going to be very intrigued to see if I get a decent one coming back. There's still some interesting ones on the board. We'll see what happens. I like my team so far. We'll see. We'll see where the rest of it goes, though.
Yeah, it is nice when you're in like the top 3 or 4 rounds and you haven't made a pick that you regret yet.
Yeah.
Those are the salad days.
The best part was I won an autographed T. Higgins jersey. It's not up here in the studio yet, but it's going to be. My wife got me a couple shadow boxes to put some of my jerseys in. She's kind of been on my ass because they were Christmas presents and I don't have them up yet. I'm on an alternative timeline, but I'm going to put my autographed Archie Griffin, which is directly behind me, and my autographed T. Higgins. You know, I got to track down Barry Sanders and Jackson Smith and Jigba and get those autographed as well. I don't know if you've noticed, but my son, number 99, has since autographed his jersey as well.
I mean, sounds like you're going to have to go to a Seahawks game here pretty soon.
Maybe I can get Garrett to hook me up with DJ Dallas to get me to Jackson Smith and Jigba.
Well, we are going to continue our quest through the AFC North, and I know Matt has been both looking forward to and probably dreading this one. We are turning our attention first to the Cleveland Browns. In 2022, the Browns finished 7-10. 4th in the AFC North. Key additions this offseason, they picked up wide receiver Elijah Moore from the Jets and safety Juan Thornhill. Key losses, Jacoby Brissett, who started 10 games for them last year, moved on to the Commanders. Actually started 11 games for them, I'm sorry. Running back Dearness Johnson moved on to the Jaguars. Greedy Williams, the cornerback, moved on to the Eagles. Chase Winovich, the defensive end, moved to the Texans. Key rookies, they drafted Cedric Tillman at wide receiver, Dawad Jones, a tackle, and Dorian Thompson-Robinson, a prospect at quarterback, but he definitely probably won't be playing unless there's a catastrophe because their key fantasy assets they traded for and then signed a long extension with Deshaun Watson before last year. Because of his suspension, he was limited to 6 games, but should be good for the whole season this year. In only 6 games, he finished as QB 35. Running backs, Nick Chubb is still there, was RB6 last year. Jerome Ford was RB154. At wide receiver, Amari Cooper was wide receiver 10. Elijah Moore was wide receiver 81 for the Jets. Kind of fell out of favor a little bit there. Donovan Peoples-Jones was wide receiver 39. And they have Cedric Tillman. And at tight end, David Njoku was tight end 11. They picked up Jordan Akins. He's tight end 18 last year. And Harrison Bryant was tight end 39 last year. So, Matt, what are your fantasy expectations for the Browns? And what are you expecting from Watson in his first full season as a starter since 2020?
I really don't know what to think of the Browns right now. Obviously, Deshaun Watson, last time we fully saw him healthy with the Houston Texans, I believe he finishes a top 5 quarterback. We know he can do it with the arm, with his legs. I like the team overall. Very good offensive line. Nick Chubb, an absolute incredible running back. I argue, in my opinion, the best pure running back in the NFL with his ability to hit holes, make cuts, and just the second level of speed he hits when he gets into the open field. And I do think Jerome Ford is going to be a more than capable backup. He's not going to be Kareem Hunt, but I think he's still very, very good. Wide receiver core, I think, is incredible with well, I shouldn't say incredible yet. Amari Cooper, Donovan Peoples-Jones, we'll see with Cedric Tillman. I did think he was the better Tennessee wide receiver to come into the draft. I just don't know that he is a great fit in this offense. I think him and Donovan Peoples-Jones do a lot of the same thing. Elijah Moore I don't think he's that good, but whatever. He's a fine addition. David Njoku, I think, could be a really good tight end. The big thing will be, and I don't think that there is much in the running now. If they were able to get DeAndre Hopkins, I think this wide receiver core would be so much better. But it's really going to come down to what Kevin Stefanski decides to do with this offense and Deshaun Watson. We've heard him say that he's going to be willing to pass the ball more now that Deshaun Watson's in there at quarterback, but he's never done that. Now, granted, he's even more of a step up from Kirk Cousins, but we saw that was part of the reason why Stephon Diggs wanted to get out of Minnesota, because they couldn't support the 2 wide receivers in Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs. They don't have 2 wide receivers, I guess, they need to support in Amari. I think it's just Amari Cooper. but I just don't know that he's going to be able to target him 300 times. Like, you've got to be able to have other players that Deshaun Watson can target. And what made Deshaun Watson so great for us in fantasy in Houston was they had arguably the worst offensive line in all of football when he was there. It was piss poor. He was having to run and make plays with his legs and buy time because the offensive line couldn't block for him. That's not going to be an issue here in Cleveland. So unless he decides to just bail out of clean pockets, his legs, I don't think, are going to be as much of a threat. So I do think he takes a small step back in fantasy, but I do think we're going to see the best Browns offense we've seen since the 2020 Baker Mayfield, Todd Monken season, which, I mean, it was a good year. I think that was the year he threw his like 28 touchdowns and only like 5 interceptions. Like, he had a really good year. Jarvis and Beckham both went over 1,000 yards. I think Deshaun Watson's going to blow that year out of the water. That's probably what we're looking at is a very good Browns offense.
Yeah, I mean, they have to be improved, right? They've got a solid offensive line. Theoretically, Deshaun Watson is the best quarterback of the Stefanski era. The downside is that in Stefanski's tenure in Cleveland, the Browns have been, their rushing offense has been 28th, and 21st in pass attempts in the NFL. So while they did take a leap last year, I mean, how far up from 21st do we expect them to go? It's not like they're not going top 10, so what, they're going to be top 15 on a good day? That's what we're hoping. So, and having a good quarterback is something that will do that to you. Now, Watson's what? Is he 28 years old now? He's been around a little bit.
I think
it says he's 27 right now.
27.
Okay.
So, he's coming off the board in the Dynasty Nerds ADP, the new July ADP.
He'll be 28 this year, September 14th. So he'll be 28 this season.
And so that's not old as a quarterback. That's kind of entering your prime, early prime. So he's coming off the board as QB 10 in the July ADP, which incorporates about half of June as it rolls over into July. That feels a little bit rich for me because you're taking a guy coming off basically 2 years on the bench and a head coach that has probably one of the best pure runners in the NFL in Nick Chubb. And so when things get dicey, he tends to turtle up and run the ball. So it could go either way. I think they're going to pass more. How much more? I don't know. Chubb has averaged around 30 targets a year, 35 targets a year, with a high in his second season of like 47.
Yeah, he saw 37 last year.
And for Nick Chubb to reach his potential, he's got to get 60, 65, 70 targets at least and convert 70% of them. Chubb is crazy because he's got so much potential. He averaged 5 yards per carry. He's a beast in the running game, and I get it. He's going off the board as RB12. If I think he'd be a top 3 favorite for RB1 if he was getting 70 targets a year, 65 targets a year, because he is so dynamic with the ball in his hands. I agree that, the wide receiver core leaves something to be desired, but it's all about potential. Moore has potential out of the slot. He's speedy. We got, our Peoples Jones and Tillman going to turn into, blockers. That would suck for fantasy. One of them has to become the heir apparent to Amari Cooper. Cooper's 30 years old now. I think he's still got a lot in the tank.
Cooper's 28.
Okay, so I'm aging him a little bit. Seems like he's been in the league 10 years.
I think he was super young when he came out.
He was, yeah.
So I like what the Browns have. I think they have a ton of potential. I think they're going to be really good. To win the division, I think they're going to need their defense to really bounce back. The defense had an off year last year. But from a fantasy standpoint, there's a lot to work with on the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah, and so you mentioned in the ADP, you're looking at the Chubb's RB12. When I looked him up on Fantasy Pros, he's going off as RB4. So not a ton of value there. I mean, he finished as RB6, 302 carries, 1525 yards, 12 touchdowns. I'm not sure he needs a ton of receiving to maintain that kind of level as long as he's still going to get those carries, which might work out that well because we didn't see Deshaun Watson dump off a lot to running backs when he was in Houston. Maybe it was the personnel that they had. But Matt, one of the things you noted, you weren't sure how much Watson was going to run. In 6 games as a starter, he had 36 carries, 175 yards, and a touchdown. Jacoby Brissett actually ran 49 times for 243 yards and 2 touchdowns. So combined, the Browns quarterbacks over 17 games did rush for a little over 400 yards and 3 touchdowns, which isn't incredible, but could help a little bit in fantasy numbers if you're looking to keep that steady floor. I think for me, the big question is Kareem Hunt's gone. Maybe they don't reallocate his targets to running backs, but he had 123 carries last year. And it's hard to imagine them giving Nick Chubb 123 more carries. Do they run the ball less, or does that open up an opportunity for somebody like Jerome Ford? And I saw he was going as RB51 with that kind of many carries out there on a team that likes to run. I actually thought he was kind of a sneaky value to me. But Dennis, what value do you see in the Browns offense?
For me, I like Njoku even at tight end 10 because he's got touchdown upside. I think he's gonna deliver this year. What was it? Jerome Ford in the Dynasty Nerds ADP, he's RB61, and that's closer. That feels closer than Nick Chubb at 12-4. Just using a magnitude scale. 4 to 6 or 4 to 12, 6 to 12 seems a lot wider than 51 to 61. If I had to pick who's the value here, there isn't a ton. Jerome Ford, but I don't think he's going to get Kareem Hunt numbers. Maybe he steps up and shows that he can be the receiving back. He was a good receiving back in college, but he was also a good running back with good speed. He just has, I think, a little bit questionable vision. The 2 wide receivers, Peoples-Jones and Cedric Tillman, I think they're going to cross each other out as they battle for that other outside spot. And, Deshaun, it feels like the Browns players are kind of all at value, except maybe Jerome Ford.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ford's probably the easy pick for value because, as you both mentioned, 51 on Fantasy Pros, 61 on Dynasty Nerds. I would not be surprised if he finishes as at least an RB3. I don't think that they are going to give him Kareem Hunt's work, but they don't have anybody else in that backfield. It's John Kelly, Demetric Felton, who's not even really a running back. He's more of a wide receiver. Hassan Hall, Nate McRae, we have seen even when they didn't have Kareem Hunt, they did not want to give Nick Chubb the ball 300 plus times and then get him 60, 70 catches. So they're going to put somebody else in there at times. They like to. It was the most frustrating part about them having Kareem Hunt, right? If you rostered Nick Chubb, it was like, why are you? He just drove you all the way down into the red zone. Why are you now pulling him out when I need those fantasy points? I don't know that they do that and put Jerome Ford in there, but Jerome Ford's going to get run. And I do think he is a very good running back. It didn't work out for him at Alabama, but he was a high 4-star running back. It's not like this was a 2-star that ended up at Cincinnati. And no, he was a high 4-star running back. And he was unfortunately part of the old college rules where when he transferred, he had to wait a year to get onto the field. He didn't have the immediate grant like they did right around COVID. So he had to sit out a year. He's a mature running back. I think he's going to be very good for the Browns. For me, at least in my opinion, the value is actually Amari Cooper, who I don't know where he's going off in Dynasty Nerds, but on Fantasy Pros, he's coming off the board as wide receiver 19. Behind Deebo Samuel, Keenan Allen, Calvin Ridley, DK Metcalf, T. Higgins, who is not going to finish as wide receiver 14, folks. Chris Olave, I mean, I would not be surprised if Amari Cooper ends up having a better year than Deebo, Keenan Allen, Calvin Ridley, DK Metcalf, T. Higgins, Chris Olave, Devonta Smith, and Jalen Waddle, because he's going to be the guy in this offense. Like, I don't understand why he's going off the board that late. Maybe it's because he really only has 1 year left on that contract, so people aren't sure where he's going to end up going. But we've seen the wide receiver ones, granted, maybe skewed a little bit because his wide receiver one for most of his career in Houston was DeAndre Hopkins, but he has had a wide receiver one every year he's been a starting quarterback. I think Amari Cooper, while he may not finish as a top 12 running back, I think he could finish close. He could be 13, 14. So you're still getting a pretty good value on that. I would not be surprised if he ends up jumping in as a wide receiver one this year.
Yeah, Dynasty Nerd actually had it. He's coming off his wide receiver 34. So
that's stupid. I'm sorry. That's ridiculous.
That's ageist to the extreme.
But
even
Cooper
Dynasty,
was wide receiver 10 last year with Jacoby Brissett throwing 11 games.
I mean, even Dynasty, you just mentioned he's 28.
Yeah, he's not ancient.
I mean, look, don't get me wrong. I have
people
shit
are
on
like,
Amari Cooper more than anybody here, and yet
from forgetting to rank him to Amari Cooper apologist in 2 short seasons.
28 years old. And well, my biggest argument against him was always he struggled with drops, right? But he hasn't done that the past. Even his last year in Las Vegas, he was not having those issues. We didn't really see that last year with Cleveland. You just mentioned he was wide receiver 10 with Jacoby Brissett. I get he's 28 years old, but we're seeing guys like Devontae Adams where what's the argument for Amari Cooper? Is that he's such a great route runner. He's not that guy who's Deshaun Jackson trying to burn you down the field.
Yeah, so if Elijah Moore.
Exactly. So, like, his game should age fairly well. So, you're probably going to have him for 3 or 4 more years. And if you're playing in a 3-year window, wide receiver 34. So, I mean, my God.
It is crazy. So, back to Jerome Ford. So, looking at Fantasy Pros, the running back 36 last year, or 37, was Rashad White. And the running back 48 was Damian Harris. So if you kind of take a look at, like, what's it going to take for him to be an RB3, we're looking at about 400 to 450 yards rushing and about 30 to 35 receptions.
I think that's doable.
6 touchdowns, 5 touchdowns. Very doable.
All right. So we've talked about the players. The $1 million question. They were 7-10 last year, but 3-3 with Deshaun Watson's games at the end of the season. Matt, how do you feel about the Browns?
I was trying to pull their schedule up, and it's not working for me at the moment because I like to look at their.
They will play the Ravens twice. I think they'll play the Bengals twice.
So
play your favorites, the Steelers.
I have to technically take the same route I did with the other ones when we talked Baltimore and Cincinnati, and I feel like because of how good all those teams are, they're going to beat up on each other a little bit, and I imagine they're going to lose at least 2, if not 3, somewhere between those 3 teams. At home, away. They're not great starting off the season against Cincinnati, who I do think is the best team in the division currently. The Titans, I think, is a winnable game. See, what sucks is they get the 49ers, which is not the Jacksonville Jaguars, Denver Broncos. Like, those are all losable games. So I think that they're probably going to lose 5, maybe 6 games. So you're looking at I'm going to go 11-6. I think they have a chance to be 11-6, which probably puts, I think is what I said, Baltimore will be right around. So a playoff team competing for probably second in the division. Now, I still think Cincinnati's the best team.
Yeah, I have them going 11-6 and 3-3 in the division. So I think they're going to have to make their hay outside of the division.
Yeah, I mean, I think anywhere in that 9-12 win range. I think the AFC North is one of those divisions that could have 4 teams above 500. all kind of competing for the playoffs. The AFC is so much stronger, it looks like, than the NFC is going to be. Some of these teams would probably have a walkover to the playoffs in the NFC, are going to be left on the outside looking in the AFC. The final team in the division is the Pittsburgh Steelers, which most of us thought that they were going to finally have Mike Tomlin's first losing season in 2022, but Mike Tomlin did not feel that way, and he willed them to a 9-8 finish. They were third in the AFC North. Key additions this offseason: Larry Ogunjobi, defensive end. They got Patrick Peterson, the cornerback, Keanu Neal, the safety, and they went ahead and picked up Allen Robinson at wide receiver. Key losses: Devin Bush, the linebacker, went to the Seahawks. Cameron Sutton, a cornerback, went to the Lions. And Terrell Edmonds, the safety, left the team. In the draft, they got Broderick Jones, an offensive tackle, and Joey Porter Jr., a cornerback, and Matt's favorite pick of the entire draft, Darnell Washington, the powerhouse receiver / blocker at tight end. Key fantasy assets: Kenny Pickett finished as quarterback 28 last year. Mitch Trubisky actually started the season. He finished as quarterback 37. Both those guys are still there. We expect Pickett will be the starter. Running back Najee Harris finished as running back 14, was a little banged up coming into the season, but didn't do too bad. Jaylen Warren, kind of a good number 2 there, finished as running back 47. Among the wide receivers, Deontay Johnson was wide receiver 28. George Pickens was wide receiver 40. Robinson, in a partial season with the Rams, was wide receiver 84. And at tight end, they have Pat Freiermuth, who was tight end 7, and then Darnell Washington. So, Dennis, what are your fantasy expectations for the Steelers? Do you think Kenny Pickett is going to grow in year 2?
I do think he's going to grow, but it's going to be kind of one of those raw number growth things. Like, he only started 12 games last year, so he's going to get all 17 games. Do I expect him to complete 70%? Probably not. He was at 63% last year. A 7-9 touchdown to interception ratio. I think that flips around with a year under his belt. Deontay Johnson's going to be there doing what he does. So Pickett's going to improve. And let me see, what was his, I think, because he's fairly mobile as well. And so he only rushed for 90 yards last. Oh, no, that was Benny. No, he rushed for 237 yards and 3 touchdowns. So across, add 5 more games to that, it's going to get him probably across that 300-yard mark, which is a good addition for a passing first offense. So I think he's going to be just fine. You know, he was at 2,400 yards. He's going to add 1,000 yards, 1,500 yards just through taking a step. You know, second year in the offense with the same coordinator. Second year, I don't think we're going to see a sophomore slump. I also think Najee Harris bounces back. Their offensive line is going to be better, and so the offense as a whole is going to be better. Dynasty Nerds has Pickett coming off at QB 20. I think he finishes probably above QB 16. So there's not a ton of value there, but there is some. To me, he feels like he's going to be in that Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr, those guys, Matt Ryan, those guys that had the tendency, occasionally he'll pop up into the QB1, but mostly they're pushing high in QB2. And I think that's going to be where he is for most of his career. I love Najee Harris this year. I'm a big fan. He's going to get the ball. Jaylen Warren is going to be, he's the guy that spells him. The big deal there, and it's crazy when you look at the Dynasty Nerds. So I get, we're Dynasty Nerds and we're all about youth and how they want to, we want to be young. So George Pickens is actually going off the board ahead of Deontay Johnson. Crazy. That's just bonkers to me. So Deontay's wide receiver 35 to Pickens wide receiver 31. So Deontay Johnson, he's going to lead the team in targets. He's going to lead the team in catches. He's going to actually score touchdowns this year. If you can get him anywhere after wide receiver, 28, 26, massive steal. Freiermuth is going to be consistent. He's tight end 7 last year, tight end 8. He's going to be a guy that I think spends his career bouncing around between the 8 and 16 range. It'll just depend on how things go each year.
Yeah, I expect this offense to take a step forward as well. I mean, Kenny Pickett, I personally did not think was that good of a quarterback. I was honestly pretty shocked that he was the one that went in the first round a year ago. They improved the offensive line not only through the offseason, but through the draft. And we've seen Mike Tomlin had a masterful coaching job last year in keeping them above 500. Dude's never had a below 500 season. Second year in this offense for not just Kenny Pickett, but George Pickens, Deontay Johnson, Najee Harris, hopefully fully healthy. You know, he struggled with injuries all last year, which I think kind of really hurt his production. I think this is going to be a very good team. You mentioned all that offense. We know they're going to have a very good defense as well. So I expect all of these players to take a step forward. Again, I don't know what to expect out of Kenny Pickett. Dennis mentioned he's going off the board as QB 20. For dynasty nerds, yeah, I agree with him. I don't think that's much of a value. I could see him jumping up into the teens. I think he probably lands there because I think they're just going to continue to run the ball a lot. What'll help them is if they do pass the ball to Najee Harris again a ton. They did that his rookie season, obviously. Not so much last year. Maybe that was because of the injury. I know a lot of people are very high on Jalen Warren and being that backup there who might get some run. He's not a great receiving threat, so maybe he steals some carries from Najee Harris, and they allow him to be more of the receiving back. I'm kind of confused on the whole Deontay Johnson thing as well. I don't know if it's just because I think George Pickens is a good wide receiver. I don't think he's got that elite upside. Deontay Johnson, I mean, we've seen.
I will say Fantasy Pros ADP.
They have them right next to each other. Yeah, I see.
Well, Deontay Johnson's wide receiver 28 and Pickens is wide receiver 40.
Oh, my bad. Yeah, it went back to standard scoring, but they were right next to each other in standard scoring. So, yeah, I mean, for me, I'm definitely going Deontay Johnson, and yeah, it is. So it is definitely different there. Again, maybe it's a dynasty value on that. People think George Pickens, a couple years younger. Deontay will be out of contract next year with the Steelers. They only signed him to that 2-year extension. I think he's going to be the one who benefits the most from, and Pat Freiermuth. I mean, he's another guy. He's a tight end that I think we kind of forget about because he had a down season last year because of the concussions. Obviously, you hope that doesn't continue to happen because that's definitely scary. But if you really look at what the Steelers were able to do last year, be a good team with Deontay struggling, the offense struggling, Pat Freiermuth injured, Najee Harris injured, and a bad offensive line, and yet they were still all fairly good pieces for you in fantasy. I would be extremely shocked if they don't take a massive step forward now with the improved offensive line and if they're able to stay healthy this year.
Either of you guys care much for Allen Robinson?
No.
Somebody's got to be in that last roster spot for free that I can cut when, who's the Washington tight end, Cole Turner, happens to catch 3 passes in a game.
Maybe I'm letting, recency bias color my view here, but he was just bad last year.
That magical union with Matthew Stafford just was not magical. Maybe he actually came to Pittsburgh hoping Mitch Trubisky would get in because it seems like he had some of his best days with good old Mitch. I'm with you. 147 targets for Johnson last year, only 84 for Pickens. Even if he comes up some, I don't see him going and surpassing Deontay Johnson. I really like Freiermuth. The one I'm most curious about is Najee Harris because I feel like when he came out a couple of years ago, was a clear 101 in rookie drafts. People were super pumped. He's going to be one of the. And last year he got off to kind of a slower start. Maybe people aren't as high on the Pittsburgh offense. He was definitely injured at the beginning of last year, and it seemed like he got a lot stronger as the year went on. He's currently going as running back 12, which is still kind of an RB1, but I feel like he is not talked about as much Still managed another 1,000-yard season. Didn't get quite as many targets last year and receptions. Be curious to see if that changes, or if he can be a little bit more efficient behind a good offensive line or a better offensive line and a little bit more healthy. So, Matt, what is your favorite value on the Steelers offense?
Well, I would say the easy one's probably Deontay Johnson. What was it? He's at wide receiver 28, right? I mean, I would be very surprised if he doesn't finish at least as an RB2. But I also do think Najee is a value as well. I know he's coming off the board as RB12, at least on Fantasy Pros. But again, Matt, you mentioned he was injured all of last season from game one on, yet he still went out there and played, again, behind a bad offensive line. That improved offensive line, him being completely healthy. I mean, look, Breece Hall is going ahead of him. We don't even know if Breece Hall is going to start the season. And there's reports that they might bring in Dalvin Cook. And maybe Dalvin Cook's just doing that to get a better contract from Miami. But still, there's a shot that Breece Hall's not even the guy there. Josh Jacobs, that's fair. I think Josh Jacobs is going to smash this year. Ramondre Stevenson, I know he was okay last year. Najee's a much more talented player. Tony Pollard, I love Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb's not going to have the receiving that Najee probably has. Like, there's a realistic shot Najee Harris is a top 5 running back again this year because he's fully healthy. For me, those are easily the steals or the values here for the Steelers.
Yeah, it's easy to bag on Najee for being inefficient when the O-line was so bad. There's not a ton of running backs out there that you look at and say this guy could be the RB1. And Najee gets the volume. He had 74 receptions as a rookie, only 41 last year. His targets were basically cut in half, and he played injured most of the year with a rookie quarterback. And I get the talking point, oh, well, as a rookie, he had Ben Roethlisberger dumping everything off. Well, that stuff kind of worked. And so as they expand the offense for Kenny Pickett, I think more of that will come back. He was down about 35 carries from his rookie season. Was that because Jaylen Warren was so good? Jaylen Warren, what was he, a 5th round, 6th round, 7th round free agent, somewhere in there? It wasn't like they were drafting Jaylen Warren to replace Najee Harris. Teams have to build depth, and so they look for good to good enough players. I like Harris as a guy that could be the RB1 this year because volume is king, and he is in line to get volume. And while I don't have them necessarily having a great record, they're going to be a good team.
Yes, you are correct. Jaylen Warren was an undrafted free agent. So, Dennis, you started to touch on it. Where do you think the Steelers end up this year?
I have them maintaining that winning record, but I have them 4th in the division at 9-8.
Same. I mean, maybe they push to 10-7 because I do think they have somewhat of an easy schedule. We'll see. Again, I think getting the Colts later in the year is worse for teams than earlier in the year, especially if Anthony Richardson starts. I think he'll be a little bit more ingrained, but Patriots, Cardinals, Packers, Titans, Rams, Texans, Raiders, it's a lot of winnable games for a good Steelers defense. But again, they do start the season with the 49ers, and they do get the Browns, Ravens, and the Bengals, which I think they could, again, lose 2 to 3 there. So I'll say 10-6.
Yeah, that's kind of for me.
10-7.
It's hard to get used to everything. I think 8 to 10 wins is the range I'm going to put in there. It's hard to imagine Mike Tomlin. I remember last year we were like, oh, they might only win 5 or 6 games. No, Mike Tomlin just is not going to let them slide down that far. And I do like a lot of the pieces they have. I think I agree with you. They could end up still being 4th in their division, just a very good division. It's going to be interesting to see how much the AFC North teams beat each other up. Any other thoughts about the AFC North?
Nope. Go Browns.
And we can keep going. Or we can stop, either or.
All right. How about we split the difference? We will move on to the NFC North. And we will look at the first of the NFC North teams, and we're going to do the other three on Friday. But the team that finished first, and they were the kings of the regular season, was the Minnesota Vikings. 2022, they finished 12-4, but they lost pretty quickly in the playoffs in the wild card round to the Giants. This offseason, they added Josh Oliver.
Hang on, I'm going to interrupt you. And
Yes.
I know this is live, so it is what it is. End the show, and then I'm going to cut the Minnesota, and I'll just put it on the front of the Friday one, so they're all together. We can just record it now. Does that make sense? Only YouTube's going to know that we're doing this live.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll cut it, or just do like the typical outro, and then jump right back into the Minnesota thing.
All right. Pretend like it never happened. Dennis, if the people have some free time this week and they're milling around trying to figure out what to do, what can they fill those hours with?
Well, while they're waiting for their slow draft Scott Fish draft to come up, they can go ahead. They can give us a follow on Twitter at Roundtable FF. They can go ahead and like and subscribe, download, listen to the podcast. Give us a rating and review. We'd appreciate it.
All right. Well, that'll do it for the AFC North. You guys have a very happy Monday.
And scene.
You just made that cut so much harder for him.
No, it'll be all right. All right.
This is what happens when you kind of at a lull in the private chat. People get in that closed window.
I didn't think about it until you start going. It's like, damn, we could probably just cut it and then put the Minnesota Vikings things on there, and nobody would know the difference. So.
All right. Well, this week we are going to jump into the NFC North, and the NFC North kicks off with the Minnesota Vikings, who finished atop the NFC North last year. In 2022, they were 12-4, finished in first place, but they did not have much of a postseason run. They lost to the Giants in the wild card round. Key additions this offseason: they picked up tight end Josh Oliver. They also picked up cornerback Byron Murphy. Key losses: Dalvin Cook, the running back, was released. Adam Thielen, wide receiver, went to the Carolina Panthers. Irv Smith, their tight end, went to the Cincinnati Bengals. Eric Kendricks, the linebacker, to the Los Angeles Chargers. And Patrick Peterson, cornerback, went to the Pittsburgh Steelers. In the draft, they picked up Jordan Addison, a wide receiver, and they picked up Mekhi Blackman, a cornerback. Key fantasy assets: Kirk Cousins was quarterback 7 last year, comes back at quarterback. Running back Alexander Madison has big shoes to fill into. He was running back 51 last year, kind of taking over, filling that void for Dalvin Cook. At wide receiver, Justin Jefferson, incredible, was wide receiver 1. KJ Osborne was wide receiver 45 last year, and they added Jordan Addison. And at tight end, TJ Hawkinson, who came over midseason from the Detroit Lions, finished as tight end 2. So I will start with you, Matt. What are your fantasy expectations for the Vikings? Do you expect Madison to do well as the lead back? And who do you expect to be wide receiver 2?
I really don't know what to think of Madison, if I'm being honest. Whenever Cook was out, I feel like he had one good game every time. If Cook was out for 3 games, it's like Madison played one good game and the other 2 were just really bad. I don't think that he is obviously the quality of Dalvin Cook. It's not a knock against Madison. There's not a lot of running backs that are as good as a running back like Dalvin Cook. I think he's going to be fine in the offense. What I actually think this means is that O'Connell's going to pass the ball a lot more. And they have a great wide receiver, too, in one Jordan Addison, who I think is going to be the guy. I think him and I don't know why I forgot who Justin Jefferson was there for a second. Him and Justin Jefferson are going to be incredible. I would not be surprised.
Your top pick in the Scott Fish Bowl?
Yeah, I was thinking of his nickname Jets, and I was like, why am I thinking of Jets? Garrett Wilson? I'm like, no, we're talking about the Vikings. I went down a whole little trail there. But I think him, and I would not be surprised if this year, if Justin Jefferson finishes again as wide receiver 1 or 2, like that's probably locked in as long as he stays healthy, which he probably won't now that I drafted him, knock on wood. But I do think Jordan Addison could sneak into very high-end wide receiver 2, possibly back-end wide receiver 1 territory this year. We've seen it a couple times where the two teammates end up being wide receiver 1s. Jordan Addison, I think, just complements Justin Jefferson so well. They do have a nice third option in KJ Osborne, who I think is likely going to be the other outside wide receiver. I do think Addison will be mainly playing in the slot. He can play on the outside, though. It's just going to be a very good passing game, I think. And Alexander Mattison will be fine, but I do think he's being overrated just a tad bit because people think he's going to come in and replicate what Dalvin Cook did or even do 70%. And I don't even think that he's going to do that much. I would not be surprised if we see this more of a committee with him, Ty Chandler. You know, I know a lot of people were high on Dwayne McBride. I don't know that he starts out the season as like the second running back in that group. Maybe he gets a little bit of run. But I just would be very surprised if we're seeing Alexander Mattison getting, 200 plus carries like you would a Dalvin Cook. Because I also don't think Alexander Madison's as good as a receiving back either. I think this is going to be split up more than people think it's going to be. He's actually my do avoid player is actually Alexander Mattison.
Yeah, I concur given where he's going. I mean, Dynasty Nerds has him going at RB28, which doesn't sound high, but for a guy that looks like he's going to be in a committee on a team that's changing their philosophy is a little bit scary. I get they signed him to an extension. They didn't pay him a lot of money to do it. They know what they're getting, but McBride is probably a better runner than Mattison, and Chandler is probably a better receiver than Mattison. It's just Mattison does both parts of the game better than either of the other two backs. And as they kind of work their way through the season and work in Chandler and McBride, it's going to end up being like the dreaded Seattle or old San Francisco or current Miami Dolphins running back mix there. I don't know how much, Cousins threw the ball 448 times last year. They ran the ball 404. They've got a 35-year-old quarterback that's had some decent seasons, but, has never been a guy that elevates everybody and is likely on his last year. So do they go out and throw it 500 times now all of a sudden? Or wait, no, they threw 672 last year. I was looking at completions. So they'll throw the ball adequately. KJ Osborne, I feel like he's more suited for the wide receiver 3, but it's the special wide receivers that come in and really perform in year 1. I don't know that is Addison that one of those guys. He's a small wide receiver. He's one of that group of small guys that came in this year that do some things really well. But make no mistake, I think that passing game runs through Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson. I think Addison and I'm more comfortable with Addison and Osborne as flexes. Addison maybe a higher end, Osborne a lower end, and they could be maddening as to which one you should start each week. Hawkinson, though, he's going to have a great year. They like him, and they used the shit out of him last year, and I think it continues.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I would think some of Thielen's vacated targets are more likely to go to Hawkinson than to go. Osborne saw 90 targets last year as it was in his appearances. I don't know that he significantly goes up. I do think he could still be a value where he's getting drafted because I think on Fantasy Pros they said he was like wide receiver 61. He finished better than that last year. I don't think if you were thinking he's going to like vault up to be a great wide receiver too, that's probably a disappointment for you, but he could probably return value later in the draft. I think some of the buzz on him early in the offseason has definitely faded now that they took Addison. But for me, Minnesota is a team that wasn't as good as their record last year. And we saw that big time when they got to the playoffs or when they played any good teams. I think they are actually cruising toward a pretty big overhaul after this season. And I'm not incredibly bullish on anyone other than Hawkinson and Jefferson. And you can't really get them at a great value in terms of ADP. So, Dennis, I'll come back to you. What would be a value for you for the Vikings?
It's crazy as it sounds. Justin Jefferson's a value. I mean, because it's the old saying, it ain't bragging if you back it up, and dude backs it up. Wide receiver 1, it's what he's going off. It's what he finished. In reality, though, Dynasty Nerds has KJ Osborne coming off at wide receiver 76. Addison at wide receiver 20. I feel like Addison's a little bit high, but Osborne is a steal at wide receiver 76. I'm not sure where Fantasy Pros has him, but I think he's gonna be a flex worthy play most weeks, and he's definitely a guy you want to target for your depth on your roster.
Yeah, Fantasy Pros has Addison at 38 and KJ Osborne at 65. For me, it is Jordan Addison. I mean, I don't disagree that TJ Hawkinson is going to be good. But he was in Detroit for a long time as arguably the weapon and could not get going. I know that he came over toward the end of the year last year at the trade deadline from Minnesota and went gangbusters. I need to see you do it for a year before I'm going to believe that you're tight end 3, which is where he's coming off the board, because I don't think that he deserves to be going there. I would not be surprised if Hawkinson is, again, good, but not great, like what he showed at the back end of the year last year. Where I think Addison thrives is the fact that he can play at every single position. He can play X, he can play Z, he can play Y. I do think he's going to be in the slot more often than not, where you already said KJ Osborne got 90 targets last year, I believe is what someone just said a minute ago. Jordan Addison's a better player. Like, he is. He's much better than KJ Osborne. I think he's going to smash in this offense because he's going to be the forgotten man. People are going to try. They're going to try and cover Justin Jefferson. It's not going to work. They're going to try to, though. And I do think that they're going to try and cover TJ Hawkinson as well. I'm under no illusion that Jordan Addison's going to steal anything away from JJ. That's not happening. JJ is an absolute stud. But I would not be surprised if, again, Jordan Addison's coming off the board as wide receiver 38, according to Fantasy Pros. I think he's got a shot to finish as at least a wide receiver 2, if not better next year, because I do think this offense will be good. Where I don't disagree with Matt, or where I agree with Matt, is I do think this team might be in flux, especially because of how bad that defense has been. But this offense was phenomenal last year, and just because they lose Dalvin Cook, I don't think it's going to change much. I think this is still going to be a very good offense.
Yeah, so if you're talking about just in terms of targets, Irv Smith vacated 36 targets. So if you add that to the 86 that Hawkinson had, that's a pretty robust share for him. So if you just looked at wide receivers, what Adam Thielen in 17 games saw 107 targets. He only caught 70 for 716 and 6 touchdowns. But if Addison saw 107 targets, you might see something a little better.
In fairness to that, Adam Thielen was kind of used in one way last year because he was dealing with the leg injuries. He just didn't seem to have what he used to have. Jordan Addison gets those targets. He's going to be able to get the yak. He's going to be able to burn some defenders. He won't be just a red zone guy.
Yeah, so it could be good value there. Well, Matt, how do you feel about the Vikings?
I find it very hard to not think that they're going to be a good team. I don't think that they're going to win the North like they did last year because of how good I think this offense is going to be. Again, I do think that the defense is going to struggle, but they do get the NFC, is the entire NFC South, which I think has a chance to all be very, very bad. Green Bay, probably not going to be a good team this year. Chicago, up in the air. We'll talk about them here in a little bit. The Bengals, obviously a good team. They have a very, at least in my opinion, an easy schedule outside of 3 very tough games and getting the Eagles, the 49ers, and the Bengals. Lions are obviously going to be their main competition in that. Even if they lose those 2, That's only 5 or 6 losses I'm seeing realistically on their schedule at the moment going into this. So I think there's a shot that they finish probably 11-6 to 10-7. That's where I would value their schedule right now and their wins.
I'm not as bullish on the Vikings. I think this. I agree with both of you that they're a team that's going to transition. I think the transition starts this year, and I think there's going to be a couple bumps in the road. That defense was horrendous last year, and they caught a lot of breaks. That's how they were able to win, and they got exposed in the playoffs. I think they're going to have to deal with that this year, and it's going to kind of prevent them from coasting. I have them at 8-9. I've got them second in the division, but at just 8-9. So I don't see two teams coming out of this division into the playoffs. I've got them going 3-3 in the division.
Yeah, so you mentioned they do play the NFC South, which I think helps them, but I think the Bears are going to be better in their own division, and I like the Lions a lot. Those Green Bay rivalry games are always interesting, but if you looked at the AFC games they have to play the AFC West, and their bonus game is the Cincinnati Bengals, where they also play a first place schedule in the NFC. So they got the 49ers. They've got the Eagles on there. This was a team that really made a meal out of weaker opponents last year and looked really bad when they played good teams last year, in large part because of the defense. If they overhauled that defense enough, maybe that makes a difference, but I'm more kind of in Dennis's camp. I have them in that 7-9 win range, probably fighting for second. That could still be good enough to be a wild card in the NFC, given what we've seen in the NFC. But I think there's a chance they end up splitting with the Bears and struggling against the Lions, or splitting against all of their divisional opponents and going 3-3, because those divisional games are a little bit hard. Maybe I'm too bullish on the Lions. That happened to me a few years ago, but I'm pretty excited to see them.
I haven't got it framed yet, Peter.
I mean, you've had a day and a half. Dennis. Work can wait. Work.
I wish.
All right. Well, do you guys have any other thoughts on the Vikings?
Nope.
Nah.
Well, for those of you joining us via the most exciting video cast we've done in the last few months, this is where we're going to leave you, and we're going to pick up next week. Dennis already said it. If you have that free time while you're waiting, a rate, a review, go on, like everything.
As opposed to irate and review.
Yes.
Irate.
If you're irate, I mean, there's plenty of podcasts out there to pick to do your review on. You can even be talking about us. Just leave it with them, and then they'll be confused. It'll be great. On Friday, for those of you who are on video, we will be going through all of the rest of the NFC North, and then our audio listeners will never even know this happened. But until then, you guys have a happy Monday.
Toodaloo.